Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome. I'm Michelle Rusk, your host, and this is the Holistic Living interview series. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Deanna Minich. So thank you for joining us, Dr. Minich.
Michelle, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Just a little bit of background about Dr. Deanna Minich. She is a functional nutritionist, author, an artist, and a yoga practitioner. She has authored 4 books, and she is the creator of the Certified Food and Spirit Practitioner Program, which you can actually find out more about on her website. So again, good morning. And Dr. Minich, I want to just kind of turn it over to you, and you can tell us a little bit more about your background, and then I'd also kind of like to know your backstory of what got you started into your food and spirit. I love your website name, by the way. Yeah, and just kind of what brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, my journey with food and eating goes back to when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. And at that time, my mom was pregnant with my brother. And as happens when women get pregnant, they develop a different awareness or consciousness about their bodies, because now it's not just them, there's somebody else. And so at that time, it was the 1970s, and my mom got into food, nutrition, her faith. It was almost like this combination of awareness. It wasn't just a food awareness, it was also a spiritual awareness. So when it came to food, there were so many forbiddens in our household, things like sugar, things like processed products. My mom went back to baking things from scratch. When I would go to events, I had to bring my own food. And in some ways, it was kind of traumatic for me because I wasn't used to, being different, and starting to be different when you're a preteen is not that easy.
Yeah.
And so for me, going into my adolescence, it was a bit tumultuous because I had so many things to contend with. I had, my body is changing. What I can eat is now restricted. And now my mom is even more restrictive in kind of like our daily living. Just her sense of faith has really changed, our household. And so she was very active in Bible study, very active in our church. I grew up Catholic. And so it was like everything was amped up and ramped up. And so, yeah, I think that this led to a lot of dysfunction in my life in terms of all of the restriction that was placed around me led me to just want more freedom. And I wanted more freedom with food. That was what I could control. I could control my body. So I started binging. I started overeating. I started emotional eating. I liked sweets a lot. I was eating lots of sugar. And my body started to develop some symptoms when I was a teenager. I developed endometriosis, which is an inflammatory condition of the uterus. At that time, I didn't know what the name of it was, but now, going back and kind of looking diagnostically, I had irritable bowel syndrome, which kind of makes sense that, when women have reproductive issues, typically there can be gut issues, or when they get gut issues, typically there can be reproductive issues.
Yeah.
I don't know for me which came first, but they seem to kind of coexist. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of lost on my path, but I always liked science. And so I thought, well, I'm going to try to just figure myself out by reading lots of books. I got a subscription to the Journal of the American Medical Association when I was 18 years old.
Good.
I thought, yeah, it was kind of funny that I was reading these medical journals and I didn't really understand, most of it. So I'd hang out in the library. At that time, we didn't have the internet. So I was at the library. I was checking out all these books. I was trying to understand myself. I went on to study biology, and I was pre-med. I went into undergraduate school and got my bachelor's in biology, decided not to become a medical doctor because I started working for medical doctors, and I realized I don't want to do that. I am not that kind of person. That's like an all or nothing kind of mentality when you're in that field. Like, you really have to sign up for that and love that, because that's intense and that's going to take over one's lifestyle.
Right.
So I kind of had this wake up call. I was in my junior year of college and I thought, you know, maybe I need to do something preventative. Maybe nutrition is where it's at. So I never thought I would come full circle into that because I was so opposed to anything food and nutrition. But it was kind of like, maybe my mom is right. So I studied nutrition. I went to graduate school. I studied 3 years and did my master's, and then I went on to do my PhD in nutrition as well. I did 4 years and studied essential fatty acids. So all that time that I'm studying, I'm still having some chronic issues. Like they aren't going away. Just when I thought I could figure myself out, eat the right foods, take the right supplements, I feel like, you know what, I'm getting better, but I'm not 100% better. There are still some things going on. And so I looked into so many different modalities. You know, there was a period of my life between, I would say like 27 to 32, when I was those ages, when it was like a flurry. I was in a job I didn't like. So I had a lot of time outside of work to just invest in other things. Like I did massage, I did mind abdominal massage, I did chiropractic, I had Reiki and energy medicine done. I looked into flower essences to help me with my emotions. I did psychotherapy. I did cognitive behavioral therapy. Gosh, I mean, you should see my library. I have so many books. Now they just kind of sit on my shelf because it's like I've been through all of that. Yeah. But at the time, I really needed some guidance. And, you know, I think all of those things help me to some extent to understand myself. And I feel like we all have to go through that process of uncovering who we really are. Yeah. And for many of us, it happens just traditionally in our 20s. You know, we kind of get to redefine who we started out as. And for me, I brought in creativity, not in any kind of logical way, like going to check out a book in the library to try to figure myself out. I just did it in desperation. I just started painting. I started creating. I started making these very vivid, colorful, huge paintings. And it was like, there was a part of me that was just being set free when I would make these paintings. It was like I didn't care what other people thought, just wanted to make them. And I would hang them up. And it was finally my husband, years later, who looked at these paintings and he said, Deanna, I think you're painting your ovaries and your uterus over and over again. Because it was like the same shape.
Oh.
Yeah, same colors. And eventually I did resolve my endometriosis. Once he said that, that turned on something for me. And I realized, you know what? Maybe my body needs to express in other ways. It needs to move. It needs to get certain things out. And so I continued painting. In fact, I even went deeper and I started to do this whole series of painting my uterus, but with intention. And so after this kind of painting spree, I did a small gallery exhibit and just at a friend's gallery. And in the end, you know, I got checked out and my gynecologist is like, your uterus looks beautiful and you have no more blocked fallopian tube. I had a blocked fallopian tube because the adhesions had, the inflammation was so great and the tissue was so inflamed that I had created these adhesions around my fallopian tube. So yeah, that was all cleared up. And she's like, wow, this doesn't normally happen. So I think for me, my path, when you ask me, you know, what's your backstory? My backstory is that I have found that we need a blend. We need a blend of science, like really investigating things with our head and figuring it out with labs, with a practitioner, with somebody who can see the root cause. And I think we also need to have our own inner intuitive, creative self-discovery path in which our story can blossom.
Yeah.
And I think the two of those together, at least for me, it worked well. And so that's what I base all my teachings on, is the connection between science and spirituality.
That's amazing. That's really awesome. And actually that really kind of speaks to me, because while you were talking, like, and I was listening, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's almost like, you know, part of what I also went through too. Like, because I think the word process is a great word, because it is a process, and it's not something to rush. Like, it's actually something to learn and actually enjoy kind of the ride, just to kind of see where it's going to take you. So yeah, no, that was interesting. I love that.
Well, I think it's like Jonathan Livingston Seagull, if anybody's familiar with those series of books that was written by that author. They're kind of like stories. And, you know, if you're still a human being, there's still stuff to learn. And even now, with me being 47, I kind of feel like I'm still learning. I mean, we all have blind spots.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, what's going to turn us on to things that we haven't seen? So and we need different things at different times of our lives too. And so who I was when I was 20 and 30 is different now in my 40s and now going in my 50s. And we're always going to change, you know, and we don't have to be the same person. You know, we can show up in different ways. And I think I think if we can see it as a beautiful process, you know, that it's a journey, that really the gift is in the experience of it all, then it becomes less stressful. Like, we got to figure it out. We got to hurry and figure it out. Because the moment that you think you figured it out, there'll be something else.
And that's true. Yep.
It's just inevitable. Yeah.
Yes. So just so I'm understanding too a little bit more about the story. So it sounded like, if I understood it correctly, that it was that emotional piece, that spiritual piece that you weren't letting go of to fully heal. So, yeah. So I think that's what I got out of it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you got it. I think that the emotional piece for me from a young age, and there were other things that happened during my childhood that, you know, everybody always has stuff. We're not unique in the way, you know, some of us have different life experiences, but we're always healing from things that happen usually very early on. And so, yeah, a lot of those things are emotional. And I do think that the body has many layers. We have the obvious physical layer that you can see as you're talking with me now, and I could see you. Right. But then we have the other non-physical layers. We have the emotions, which are really important drivers of our health. In fact, I mean, if you think about it, we move towards pleasure and we move away from pain. Our whole life is based on that process of moving towards pleasure and away from pain. We do not want to have fear and stress. We're going to move away from that. So we're actually very emotionally driven creatures, and emotions run our lives. Even though they're short-lived, they come up, we feel them. Then oftentimes an emotion connects to a thought. And then we make that emotion live in our lives. And so, yeah, I think for me, all that stifling and all that rigidity when I was growing up only led to me trying to find freedom. And I had to find freedom in many different ways. I tried it through eating. I tried to find freedom through searching for information to liberate me from what was going on in my body. And then ultimately, it was really finding liberation through being me on a canvas and not having anybody tell me how to be. You know, it was just kind of like breaking out. And I do think, you know, this word freedom is a big thing for so many people. I think many people feel shackled by their lives. They feel shackled by their disease. They feel constrained by their day-to-day. They feel really locked in by their schedule. You know, a lot of moms feel like, oh my gosh, you know, this is a lot, you know, how do I get like 5 minutes of alone time? And so it's kind of like, how do you find freedom? I think freedom comes from within. I really do think that the only way to truly liberate ourselves is to do so through our emotions and our thought processes, you know, mindfulness, meditation. A lot of these mind-body therapies can allow us a different mental framework that enables us to be free. And then we feel like, oh, wow, we have locus of control in so many things. There's, you know, I had a spiritual teacher who told me once, she's like, you know, there are at least 11 solutions to every problem. And oftentimes we get locked into thinking like there's one, like, okay, I have endometriosis. What's the diet? What's the drug? Well, maybe there are multiple paths down that trajectory of healing. So, and maybe we need to try each of them. You know, it's kind of hard to say what our destiny is, and we're creating it as we go. Right. So, but I do think the sense of freedom is important when it comes to health.
Yeah. And I definitely think, again, yet another great point, because we are each our own individual. So we're not all coming from the same journey. We're not all coming from the same past traumas and emotional and spiritual backgrounds.
Right.
So that's why it is important that, yes, if you're going to explore kind of what's going on with you, be mindful of, take all of that into consideration, and don't worry about what everybody else is doing.
You just can't. You got
Yeah,
to stay focused on your own path. And so many people go around and they're asking everybody else what they should do. What do I do? And then the more opinions they get, it's almost like they kind of lose sight of it. And I feel like there has to be a balance. There's an information gathering phase of,
yeah.
okay, let me read this book. Let me listen to this summit. Let me, you cast that net wide.
Yes.
And I think that it's great that there are so many summits now, because it's really opening the accessibility to information. So that's huge. That's, that we can do that. The other part that we have to balance is how do we digest all of that? Because we can get indigestion if we're taking in so many things and so many people around us. We're always asking our friends, our family, medical intuitives, practitioners. It becomes like a full-time job to get other people's opinions.
Right.
So there has to be a balance with what do we feel inside, and doing the deep work. I ended up working with some incredible spiritual teachers who would always encourage us to find our own answers. Like, nobody can really tell you what's best for you. I mean, obviously, if you have a health condition and there are certain physical things you can do and you just don't have the training, that makes sense. But in the whole scheme of things,
I look at that as a starting point.
Yeah. And I think that's, and some people still don't even understand or feel free or know that there are other options on that front. And that's really what your summit is about too, is the idea that there's holism, that there's a bigger, complete picture and an exploration that you can look into. And, again, when we feel most desperate, sometimes that opens up doorways into ways of thinking that we wouldn't otherwise be going down. That's what happened to me in my late 20s, when I was kind of just feeling like I was just very lost, just lots of emotions. And then I just started trying everything. And everything I tried taught me something about myself. So it's all good, and again, it has to be an individualized process. Not all of us are the same, and we're not going to receive information and feel in a certain way. But I think that awareness is key. Awareness of how we feel emotionally, how we're thinking. Most people think about what they're eating. They don't think about what they're thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And thoughts are very influential. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I in the nutrition field, so since my background is nutrition, I've seen all kinds of people, and some very righteous, judgmental, opinionated people about certain dietary regimens. And I'm thinking, wow, all of that mental toxicity combined with eating well, what if they were positive?
Exactly.
That could be a synergistic connection with food, rather than, feeling kind of lopsided with having, the food part may feel good for them, but then they're generating so much on the way of the negativity. So it's off kilter.
Yeah. Well, now I want to talk a little bit about, I do want to go here, as with you being a holistic nutritionist, what are your thoughts on genetically modified foods? Because I think, as a mom too, as y'all can all hear my little one in the background.
She's chiming in how she feels about GMOs.
I'm just, it has been a topic of discussion. A lot of people, you have your against it completely, then you have some that are kind of like, yeah, it's really not a big deal. I know where I stand. What are your thoughts?
I'm probably right smack in the middle. If you're asking about me personally, I want to know if I'm buying a food that's been genetically modified. I want the choice. I want the freedom to choose.
Yeah.
And so I live in Washington State, and a couple of years ago, the GMO labeling bill was attempting to be passed, and it did not. And that was a sad day for me. I remember I was crying. I was literally crying, like, how could this be? I want to be able to know what goes into my food. And so I think me as a consumer, I want choice. I want to know. I want that ability to know. And the best choice I can make now is to buy organic food. That's, but still in the United States, there's so much cross contamination. I think that the European Union has done a good job of trying to seal off importing foods, or having this no GMO policy, which I think is good. And I think that is the higher choice. So when you ask me, what's your take, it doesn't feel right to me to genetically modify what nature has already put in place, right? It just feels like we're changing the DNA. We don't know the long-term outcomes of that. And it may perform differently in our bodies, like so many other synthetic substances don't react well. And so unfortunately, we don't have a lot of studies to suggest, because that would be very cumbersome to try to study that, and not very, who's going to fund the research? It has to be a long-term study. But intuitively, I think we all kind of know that it doesn't feel right. But there have been cases, for example, where rice has been genetically modified to have more vitamin A. And, this enriched rice being used in countries like India. So, I think about that, can there be a higher path of genetically modifying foods? I think everything, it's like a sword. A sword can be wielded in a negative way, and it can be wielded in a positive way. I think me at the level, again, of who I am and what I tell people and when I'm educating, it's don't choose GMOs. But on the bigger picture of things, could it ever be used in a positive, healthy, healing way? Perhaps. I don't want to completely rule that out either. But my preference is definitely no GMOs.
Yeah, no GMOs. And yes, even just in my reading and in my own research, I have seen that, obviously, and I do buy organic, but that there's no guarantee, because like you said, there's actually one of the best things that anybody could do is grow your own garden, and even at that, you have to consider where you live, who lives around you, because you don't know what your neighbors are spraying on their foods, or on their yards rather. But I think the point is just, do the best that you can do. Make the decisions that are best fitting to, your own situations. Like I said, for me, I choose organic. And I do really try to stay away from GMOs, because it doesn't, I like how you say that it just doesn't feel right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think so too. And yeah, you raise a good point. I mean, even if we grow our own food, I live in a rural area that's really beautiful, and we live on 5 acres. And I had my glyphosate levels tested, and they were the same as somebody living in middle America in, the bread basket, in a very agricultural spot. So I'm thinking, it's a lot of these chemical compounds. This is separate from GMOs. GMOs is a different issue than pesticides.
Yeah, right.
But when we think of pesticides, it's hard to avoid them. You can be in a rural area, you can be in an urban area. And the fact that they persist, the key word is that they're persistent organic pollutants. They're also called POPs in the scientific world, because they don't degrade very easily. And that's the problem, is that, heavy metals are another one where we just continue to recirculate them. So just buying organic does not free you of heavy metals. It doesn't make any claim on heavy metal content. It only makes, ensures good growing practices so that there's minimal, we can't control for contamination, but that there's no inclusion of pesticides, herbicides, and insecticides. But, pesticides and all these other contaminants, it's been estimated that there are something on the order of 80,000 different chemicals. And I wrote a book on detox. So I teach about detox. And, most people think, well, that's okay. I poop, I pee, I sweat, I get these things out. And it's like, well, not everybody gets them out equally. Some of us are more efficient in our processes than others. And it could be because of genetics. It could be because of bowel patterns. It could be because of just how our body is constructed. So Yeah, I think it's worthwhile to mention this question about GMOs because it kind of takes us down the path of looking broader at contaminants in our environment and where we can minimize exposure. We may not be able to avoid things because it's just persistent, but we may be able to minimize and reduce by making good choices in food, air, water, personal care products, not smoking, even taking care of ourselves as far as, making sure that we eat a nutrient dense diet can help to protect us from a lot of these toxins too.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about glyphosate? Am I saying that correctly? I think so.
Glyphosate?
Glyphosate, yeah. Because I think that's a word also that a lot of people are seeing more and more. And I'm not sure everybody really understands, well, what is it? Where does it come from? Like, what is it actually doing to us?
Sure. Glyphosate is the active in Roundup. And so if you look at Roundup, people use it on their crops, on their gardens in order to reduce pests and to prevent growth of, just things that they don't want there. And so you'll find it at like your neighborhood stores. And this glyphosate does so much to damage our bodies in a number of different ways. And there's a great researcher on this if you're interested. Her name is Stephanie Seneff, Seneff. And so she's done a lot of work looking at how glyphosate changes our metabolic pathways, how it changes our detoxification pathways, how it changes our gut microbiome, and all of these in not good, healthy ways, in detrimental ways. And so, yeah, that's one of the things in the environment that can persist and that we can find, especially when I think about people in neighborhoods or being close to farms and how we can, be contaminated or exposed to this as a contaminant. So yeah, we have to keep our pulse on, and we can measure the amount of glyphosate in our bodies. We can go to certain practitioners and give a urine sample, and we can find out what is the level of glyphosate that's coming through us just by way of just metabolism and normal excretion. And we can see how we measure up, just like I did in that test, against other people in other parts of the country. So there are a couple of labs that do that. So if you go to a functional medicine or an integrative health practitioner, typically they can order that test for you and you can get a good sense. And some people don't process glyphosate very well. Again, back to the liver enzymes, detoxification. These are maybe not completely, they're not working 100% because we have maybe genetic inefficiency. So sometimes it can take a little bit more on the way of the nutrient side to move glyphosate through us.
Yeah. So, and just so everybody's clear that it's in a lot of foods.
Yeah, definitely. And even 30% of organic food, this is a statistic that I read somewhere, 30% of organic food can be contaminated with pesticides, insecticides, herbicides, just by way of cross-contamination. Not because the food was grown with those things, but because just through shipping and distribution, being on trucks, if you think about it, you go to the store and you touch all this food. I like to recommend to people that when you bring your food home, especially if it's exposed, if you can, wash it, because otherwise this tracks then in your home. So, the Environmental Working Group website, which is ewg.org, is a wonderful resource for people that want to know more about these types of things, whether it's how do you buy a sunscreen? How do you buy a water filter? How do you buy an air filter? What are the foods that are must-have as organic versus nice to have as organic, because they tend not to always be contaminated.
Right.
So the ewg.org site is a wonderful place to get more information. I think it's really, we need more tools to become aware and empower our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the reasons, like we were talking beforehand, one of the reasons why I am definitely doing this summit, just because on my own self journey and my own process of cleaning things up, because I was sick at one point, I had oh my gosh, I don't even know how many realizations that, holy cow, you
Mm-hmm.
know, this stuff is in our food systems, it's in our waterways, it's in, you know, it's really not good for us. You know, they're cancer causing carcinogens and all of this. So yeah.
It's true. And your focus on personal care products is an excellent one because, you know, it's been estimated that by the time the average woman is taking her morning coffee, you know, she drinks coffee, she's applied 126 different chemicals to face, body, and hair from 12 different products. That
Yes.
work comes from the book Slow Death by Rubber Duck, two Canadian guys who started researching what is their exposure over a certain number of days. And men are not exempt from this either.
Right.
You know, men are typically exposed to about 8 different products in the morning. And it's everything from toothpaste to mouthwash to deodorant to makeup. You know, think of hair dye, you know, the longer term things. So, you know, but there are alternatives, as you know, within that realm. There are so many alternatives. And, you know, I'm just returning from a health show, an expo. More and more of these companies are cropping up, which is really a good thing because we need to get the word out. It shouldn't just be in certain esoteric circles, like you got to go to this health food store from the 1970s in order to find products. No, it should be like mainstream. You go to your mainstream grocery store, and next to the popular products, which are contaminated, there are the healthy products, which are not. And maybe they're just a little bit more in price, but you know what? In the end, it's absolutely worth. You're going to pay at some point. Whether you're going to pay later, you're going to pay now.
Either you're going to be paying with your health.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
you know, and that's definitely one of the things that I always thought of, because I was in my changes, I was like, oh my gosh, this is expensive. Like, I definitely saw our grocery bill. It does go up. And I think at the beginning, my husband was like, woman. But, you know, but at that point in time, like, I was like, okay, well, think of it in terms of this. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive up front, but healthcare, you know, are we going to keep doing this to ourselves and I'm going to get sicker and sicker? We're going to end up paying more in healthcare. So, you know, yes, that is, yeah, it's worth it.
Yeah. It's all about, again, freedom to choose, the fact that we can choose what type of product and, you know, minimize too, you know, be creative. And, you know, it's so expensive. Let's just take hair dye. It's so expensive for women to go to a salon, get their hair dyed, and it's so toxic, you know, and there are other alternatives like henna, or, you know, just letting yourself go gray or letting yourself be brunette instead of blonde, you know, maybe we need to let more of our true self out. And so, yeah, I think it's a bigger call on a societal level to really be looking at our choices. Yeah. Our choices make who we are ultimately.
Yeah, I totally agree. That was great. So, any last tips or information that you want to leave with our guests?
You know, I think I'll bring it back to food because I am a nutritionist. And so I often get questions about food. And one of the things I can tell you, because there's so many different eating styles out there, you know, there's keto that's becoming really popular now. There's paleo, there's being a vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, you know, lacto-ovo vegetarian, I mean, whatever it is, whatever label that is out there. So there's so many options, which is good because, you know, every diet I've ever been on, I've learned something about myself in doing that diet. And so what I would say is that the underlying thread of all of those diets is really the idea to connect to color, colorful foods, colorful whole foods. I'm not talking Skittles and M&Ms. I'm talking fruits, vegetables, herbs, spices, legumes, whole grains, you know, foods that provide us with not just the macronutrients, not just protein, carbohydrate, and fat, but phytonutrients, things that are doing our body good on multiple levels for detoxification, for metabolism, for brain function, for heart function as well. I mean, it's just, so to choose more fruits and vegetables, I don't think anybody can argue with the science on that. I think it's sound. We couldn't arm wrestle on fruits and vegetables. It's like, okay, maybe certain fruits for certain conditions and certain vegetables for other things, but essentially, this is something that we can all do. And everybody can purchase and has the right to purchase fruits and vegetables at the grocery store. We just have to make that choice.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, but it's not convenient. And I'm like, well, it's not convenient to peel an orange or to eat a banana relative to opening up a bag of chips, and we just get so much more from colorful food. We actually can live a more colorful life when we make the choice for color. So I make it simple with people. I say, eat a rainbow. Yeah. Try to get your red foods, whether it's cherries, an apple, or red grapes, whatever it is. Then get your orange, whether it's persimmons, or I just bought some kumquats. I don't normally eat kumquats. And I'm like, I need to vary up my orange, and then the yellow food. So, you go through the spectrum and you try to get all those colors. And I think that works for kids. Kids like colors. We're drawn to looking at colors. And so let's tap into that more. I think that would be my last pearl here with you, because if I can get that message out more and more, that's a unifying factor of all different diets, it's healing, it's scientifically valid, then why wouldn't we do it? So to make it simple, eat a rainbow.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all this great information. It's been wonderful to have you.
Oh, you're so welcome. And thanks for putting on the summit.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And thank you everybody for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.